In the last century or so, humanity has reached this level of like technological and physical comfort that our ancestors couldn't have even hallucinated.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's completely unprecedented.
Right. But then, if you actually look around at the world today, collective anxiety, localized violence, self-inflicted suffering, it all seems to be at an all-time high.
Yeah, it really does.
It almost feels like our pain is, I don't know, scaling right alongside our progress. And today, we're going to look at a highly controversial answer to why that is. Like, what if the global chaos you see scrolling across your phone isn't humanity failing, but actually a necessary evolutionary alarm clock ringing?
Which is an idea that completely flips our default biological programming. Because we are hardwired, to view pain and regression as a total error in the system.
Yeah, glitch.
Right. When something hurts or when society seems to take this massive step backward, the immediate assumption is just that the machine is fundamentally broken.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring a really profound framework laid out by spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle, addressing the specific mechanics of suffering and this concept of the dark night of the soul.
It's a fascinating perspective.
It really is. Our mission today is to unpack why humans suffer, both as individuals and as a massive global collective. We're going to explore this mind-shifting idea that our darkest, most painful periods are the exact friction required to force human evolution.
Yeah, friction is the perfect word for it.
So if you've ever felt completely overwhelmed by the chaos of history, or maybe a crisis in your own life that just, shattered your reality, we're going to dive into the hidden mechanics of exactly why that happens.
But grounding this in abstract philosophy usually loses people right out of the gate. So we should probably start with the lived experience that actually prompted Tolle's entire breakdown of this concept.
Good call. Where do we start?
Well, there's a woman named Suviad from Ottawa, Canada.
Yeah.
And she experienced a textbook, Dark Night of the Soul, like over 2 decades ago. Her catalyst was incredibly specific, but the psychological mechanism underneath it is completely universal.
Okay, what happened to her?
So she had dedicated her entire life to a particular spiritual teacher. She built her whole framework of meaning around this person's teachings, and then that teacher was publicly discredited.
Oh, wow. I mean, that is so much more than just a disappointment.
Exactly. It's devastating.
That is the sudden, violent evaporation of your entire roadmap for reality. Like, imagine dedicating years of your life to a specific path, and overnight the foundation just dissolves.
Yeah, she actually described it as the most agonizing period of her life. And she didn't just, meditate her way out of it in a weekend.
Right, it's not a quick fix.
No, not at all. It was this grueling, years-long process where she had to rely on a loving husband, intensive therapy, a lot of writing, and what she called grace, just to literally survive the collapse of her worldview.
And that collapse is really the defining feature of the Dark Night, isn't it? I mean, individual suffering is just an absolute inevitability of the human condition.
Yeah, over the course of your life, you are going to be severely challenged.
Yeah.
It's unavoidable.
Right. And it often manifests in relationships simply because the friction between two human egos is just immense. But, I mean, the trigger could be your career or an unexpected financial ruin or a sudden, terrifying health diagnosis.
Exactly. And unless a person is already operating at this incredibly high level of conscious awareness, they are going to suffer deeply when their perceived reality just goes completely off script.
So the core thesis here argues that humans simply do not awaken spiritually when they are comfortable. Like, change and evolution actively require you to be violently pulled out of what feels safe.
Right. It demands disruption.
It actually makes me think of astronauts in zero gravity. Have you heard about this? When they are up in space, floating around comfortably, they actually start losing bone density at a rapid pace.
Oh, because there's no resistance.
Exactly. Without the literal physical trauma of gravity pulling against the skeleton, the human body just stops maintaining bone mass. The friction of gravity isn't just a nuisance, it's the biological trigger that tells the system it has to stay dense and complex and strong.
That is a perfect analogy. The human psyche operates on that exact same mechanical principle. I mean, the comfort zone is biologically and spiritually stagnant.
Because nothing is pushing you.
Right. You don't grow there because your environment is demanding zero adaptation. Suffering is the mechanism that forces a sudden leap in consciousness. Every life form basically needs to experience being yanked out of its equilibrium to manifest its latent powers.
So when things go terribly wrong,
When things go terribly wrong, that is the exact environmental pressure required to force you to adapt, to become more complex, and ultimately to wake up.
Wait, hold on. Does this mean we should be out there actively sabotaging our lives? Like, should I go seek out a financial crisis or intentionally ruin a perfectly good relationship just to force an evolutionary leap?
No, no, definitely not. There is a massive distinction between the natural function of suffering and the ego's desire for self-destruction.
Okay. Phew.
Yeah. It's not about actively seeking out pain. It's about recognizing the function of the pain when it inevitably arrives at your door. You don't need to invite a crisis. The universe is going to supply plenty of friction on its own.
That's reassuring, I guess.
Right. The goal is to stop viewing the unexpected crisis as a punishment and instead see it as the biological and spiritual mechanism demanding your growth.
Okay, so if individual resistance builds personal growth, what happens when we scale that up? Like, if my personal heartbreak forces me to evolve, how does collective suffering drive the evolution of the entire planet?
Scaling this up reveals a staggering biological pattern, actually.
Yeah.
Geologists have mapped out 5 major mass extinction events in the Earth's history.
Like the dinosaurs.
Exactly. The most famous one is the asteroid impact that wiped out the dinosaurs and roughly 70 to 80% of all life forms on the planet. We are talking about total unimaginable devastation of the existing biosphere.
Just absolute planetary chaos, everything burning.
And yet, after every single one of those extinction events, the planet didn't just passively recover, it regenerated into something entirely new.
How so?
Well, the vacuum created by the death of the apex predators forced the surviving biology to innovate or die. Over millions of years, the life forms that emerged out of that chaos were exponentially more complex. Like mammals developed entirely new neural architectures.
Oh, I see.
The pattern across planetary history is undeniable. Immense chaos and the collapse of an old system are literally the prerequisites for a new, higher order.
Okay, so Tolle maps this exact biological pattern of chaos and rebirth directly onto the evolution of human consciousness.
He does.
Like, look at the massive historical leap that happened roughly 2,500 years ago. You had this enormous influx of higher awareness occurring almost simultaneously across completely isolated parts of the globe.
It's crazy when you look at the timeline.
It really is. The Buddha was alive in India. The writers of the Old Testament were fundamentally altering Western theology. In China, Laozi was writing the Tao Te Ching. Zoroaster was preaching in Persia, and the ancient Greek philosophers were, laying the groundwork for Western logic.
All around the same time.
Yeah, it was this incredible simultaneous peak of human awareness that eventually built the foundation for the great Greek and Roman civilizations. But if we hit this massive global peak of enlightenment 2,500 years ago, what happened? Did humanity just collectively drop the ball?
Well, the evolution of human consciousness is not a smooth, upward trending line.
Mm-hmm.
Just as the Greek civilization diminished and the Roman Empire took over, acting as this somewhat continuous era of antiquity, that era also faced an inevitable structural collapse.
Right.
Around the year 350 to 400 AD, the Western Roman Empire fundamentally dissolved.
Yeah.
And that collapse didn't just mean a change in government, it ushered in a staggering regression of human consciousness.
You're talking about the Dark Ages.
It's exactly. A roughly 1,000-year period of intense regression. And we really need to look at how that actually manifests physically. When the overarching idea and unifying meaning of Rome vanished, the collective vision fractured.
Everything just broke apart.
Society devolved into localized survivalism. You don't collaborate on massive public works like aqueducts or spend your time writing philosophy when your primary daily goal is just protecting your immediate family from raiders.
That makes total sense. You're just trying to survive the night.
Right. The collective consciousness shrank to the immediate physical radius. Philosophies disappeared. The general population literally lost the ability to read and write. It was a time characterized by widespread violence, dark superstitions, and a massive lowering of collective awareness. It was an entire continent plunged into a collective dark night.
1,000-year dark night is a terrifying concept. But, even in the absolute depths of that period, consciousness didn't go totally extinct, right?
No, it survived, but it was forced into these small, highly insulated pockets. You had conscious individuals, primarily monks, living in isolated monasteries, who meticulously copied texts and kept the faint flame of awareness alive.
Even while everyone else was terrified.
Exactly, while the vast majority of the population was operating from a space of deep fear and localized survival. So the historical takeaway here is that human progress operates in vast, undeniable cycles. We experience an era of growth and a gain in collective consciousness, followed inevitably by an era of regression and a severe loss of consciousness.
It's wild. Because you look at a chart of human history and you expect this nice, smooth, gradual incline toward like a high-tech utopia, but really it acts just like the stock market.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, you have these overall massive long-term gains, sure, but along the way you suffer these terrifying, devastating crashes that wipe out huge amounts of perceived progress. And understanding those crashes proves that human progress isn't permanent. So if human progress isn't a permanent upward line, and we are subject to these devastating cyclical crashes, we have to ask the terrifying question, where exactly are we on that chart right now?
Tolle's assessment is incredibly sobering on this front. He argues that humanity is currently in a regressive period. We are actively moving through a downward cycle.
Really? A downward cycle right now?
Yes. Collectively, humans are becoming more unconscious, and as a direct result, we are generating massive amounts of self-inflicted suffering.
I mean, when you look at the news, the greater part of human suffering today isn't stemming from unavoidable natural disasters or incurable diseases.
Yeah.
It is actively inflicted by humans onto other humans.
We swap roles constantly, too, sometimes playing the victim, sometimes the perpetrator.
Yeah, it's a localized and global suffering born out of our own unawakened state. The first half of the 20th century is a brutal, undeniable example of this regression. 2 world wars, industrialized genocide, just unimaginable horror.
And it hasn't stopped.
No, and today, we don't even have the psychological buffer of distance. Modern devices pipe this global suffering directly into our nervous systems in real time. You can sit in a perfectly safe, climate-controlled living room, and the trauma of the entire planet is just glowing right there in the palm of your hand.
And exposure to that volume of real-time suffering creates a highly specific psychological trap. When you watch the news and see the endless localized violence and global conflicts, the mind naturally generates thoughts like, we haven't learned a single thing. We are just endlessly repeating the same horrific mistakes. Humanity is a virus, and this is all utterly pointless.
Well, I mean, how can you not think that when you see what humans do to each other on a daily basis? Cynicism feels like the only logical, educated response to the data.
It definitely feels logical. But falling into that despair is actually feeding the exact mechanism that caused the problem in the first place, the ego.
The ego.
Yeah. And in Tolle's framework, the ego isn't just arrogance or vanity. The ego is the human mind's desperate mechanical need to identify with form, with labels, and above all, with a sense of complete separation from everything else.
Oh, I see.
Cynicism reinforces that separation. It creates a narrative of me, the intelligent observer, versus the broken, irredeemable world. If you let the contemplation of global suffering pull you into heavy despondency, you are actively adding to the collective unconsciousness. You become a participant in the regressive movement.
Okay, but if we're in this downward spiral driven by our own collective ego and our illusion of separation,
Right.
why does the resulting turmoil have to be so incredibly horrific? Like, what is the actual mechanical function of global suffering?
Tolle frames this through the concept of the nightmare. Think about it. If you are asleep and having a mildly pleasant or even just a neutral dream, you have absolutely zero motivation to wake up.
Right, you'll just hit snooze.
You will stay asleep indefinitely. It is only when the dream morphs into an unbearable, terrifying nightmare that your consciousness is forced to break the illusion and wake up.
Oh, it reminds me of the mechanics of a lucid dream. You know, you're having a nightmare, the monsters are closing in, you're falling, and the fear spikes so intensely that the sheer volume of terror breaks the dream logic.
Yes, exactly.
Their brain suddenly snaps into awareness and you realize, wait, none of this is real, I'm dreaming. In the split second you realize you're dreaming, the nightmare instantly loses its power to control your nervous system. So global suffering is basically humanity's ultimate terrifying alarm clock.
That's precisely it. The suffering we see on a global scale is a self-created bad dream. Interestingly, the leaders who appear to be the evil masterminds responsible for massive global upheavals, they don't emerge from a vacuum.
They don't.
No. They are actually the physical personifications of the collective unconsciousness. They ride the wave of the collective fear and ego. They are the nightmare made flesh.
That is a terrifying thought.
It is. But the profound paradox here is that on its own level, when you are in the midst of the suffering, the pain is 100% real. The physical and emotional agony of a war zone or a personal tragedy is absolute.
Right, we're not denying that.
But from a macroscopic evolutionary perspective, humanity actually needs the nightmare. The nightmare is the driving force. The pain is the only mechanism strong enough to force the collective ego to collapse under its own dysfunction.
Okay, so if the evolutionary goal of the nightmare is to force us to wake up, what is our actual functional job while the alarm clock is blaring? If I'm not supposed to get consumed by despair, but I can't just ignore the pain of the world, what do I do?
Your function is to act as a witnessing presence. You observe the nightmare without becoming the nightmare. You refuse to get drawn into the emotional reactivity, the deep anger, or the mental narratives that insist everything is doomed.
Which is incredibly easy to say in a studio and incredibly difficult to do in reality. How do we practically apply this without just panicking or dissociating?
Well, we have to understand Carl Jung's concept of the collective unconscious. You are not an isolated, autonomous entity operating in a vacuum.
We deeply feel like we are, though. We walk around in our own little bubbles, convinced our thoughts are entirely private and disconnected from the person sitting next to us on the train.
Right, but underneath our sense-perceived reality, all human beings are intimately interconnected. You are fundamentally a cell within the totality of humanity.
A cell. Okay.
And because of that architecture, your individual state of consciousness directly and literally alters the frequency of the whole. If you maintain a witnessing presence, if you refuse to be pulled into the gravitational orbit of reactivity and darkness when a crisis hits, you are actively elevating the collective whole. You are doing the work for the rest of the species.
To achieve that, Toye introduces this deeply abstract concept of the I am consciousness. The idea is that the physical person you identify as your name, your personal history, your physical body is really just a temporary garment that universal consciousness is put on for a little while.
Yes, exactly.
And when the physical form inevitably dissolves, that ray of consciousness simply takes on a new form. The core essence of who you actually are is timeless and completely indestructible.
You are not a human person occasionally experiencing moments of universal consciousness. You are the universal consciousness currently experiencing the limitations of personhood.
I understand the philosophy, but I have to push back hard on the practical application of this. I mean, it is really, really difficult to look at a friend who just went through a gut-wrenching divorce, or someone who lost their home in a fire, or someone...
When you are caught in the bad dream, that pain is your absolute reality. The key to surviving the dark night of the soul isn't to philosophically bypass the pain. It's to cultivate and hold a strict dual awareness.
So how does dual awareness actually function in the middle of a crisis?
On one hand, you must allow yourself to feel deep, genuine empathy and compassion for the very real pain happening on the ground, both your own personal heartbreak and the suffering of strangers across the globe. You don't numb it out.
You let yourself feel it.
But simultaneously, behind that empathy, you must anchor yourself in the higher level understanding that your core essence, the I am, cannot be harmed by the nightmare. You hold intense compassion for the tearing of the garment, while never losing the quiet knowledge that you are the eternal wearer of the garment.
So you feel the heartbreak completely without ever letting it convince you that the universe itself is fundamentally broken. As we bring this deep dive to a close, it is fascinating to see how these universal patterns of suffering and awakening form the absolute bedrock of major world religions.
The parallels are striking when you strip away the dogma. In Buddhism, the entire foundation of the Buddha's teaching is centered on the concept of dukkha, or suffering.
Right.
The Buddha explicitly stated, "I teach suffering and the end of suffering." His entire framework maps out exactly how the ego constructs the nightmare and the precise meditative mechanics for breaking the illusion and waking up from it.
And you see the exact same mechanical paradox at the center of Christianity. The foundational image of the entire religion is the cross. On a strictly physical level, the cross is a literal instrument of torture.
Yes.
It represents gruesome death, public humiliation, and the ultimate extreme of physical suffering. But at the exact same time, within the theology, it is the ultimate symbol of divine transcendence, resurrection, and the birth of a new reality.
It perfectly captures the paradox.
It really does. The very instrument that causes the agonizing death of the human ego is the exact same instrument that provides the transcendence. The nightmare and the awakening aren't just related, they are completely intertwined.
The cross signifies both the brutal reality of the suffering and the inevitable overcoming of it. It's the visual representation of the dark night of the soul, finally yielding to the dawn. Just as the mass extinction of the dinosaurs forcefully cleared the ecological slate to make way for far more complex mammalian life, the individual and collective suffering we face today is forcefully clearing the ground for a higher state of consciousness.
So, what does this actually mean for you navigating your own life today? We started this deep dive promising a shift in perspective, a way to make the chaos make just a little more sense. And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to sit with.
What's that?
If we accept the premise that collective suffering is the necessary biological and spiritual friction that forces human evolution, and if we accept Jung's idea that we are all deeply interconnected cells within a massive collective consciousness, how much of your own private, everyday anxiety is actually yours?
Wow. When you really unpack the implications of that, it changes how you view your own mind.
Doesn't it? When you feel that sudden, inexplicable tightness in your chest on a Tuesday afternoon, or when you feel totally overwhelmed by a generalized dread about the state of the world, how much of that is actually your personal localized baggage? And how much of it is you simply acting as a sensitive antenna, feeling the collective, agonizing growing pains of an entire species that is trying desperately to wake up from a nightmare?
You aren't broken. You are just feeling the intense friction of human evolution happening in real time.
Exactly. So the next time you face a sudden crisis, the next time your comfort zone violently shatters, or you watch the news and feel the heavy despair pulling at you, try to observe the mechanics of it differently. Don't view the pain as a cosmic punishment. Don't view regression as a sign that the human experiment has failed. View it as your personal evolutionary alarm clock. The nightmare is getting incredibly loud right now, but only because it's finally time to wake up.